President Trump has reiterated that he is considering a limited military strike against Iran if it fails to make a deal over its nuclear program.
The United States military began major combat operations in Iran.
At 5:17 local time, the Strait of Hormuz stopped being quiet inside the Combat Information Center of the lead American destroyer. The first warning did not come as a shout. It came as a tone, short, sharp, mechanical. The kind of tone every sailor understands before the words arrive. A surface search radar operator leaned closer to his screen. 3 contacts had appeared northeast of the formation, low over the water, moving fast from the Iranian coast. Not fishing boats, not aircraft, not commercial traffic. The tracks were too clean, too fast, and too direct. Seconds later, the Aegis combat system began sorting the data. Speed, bearing, altitude, flight path, probability of impact. On the main tactical display, 3 thin lines stretched across the strait like knives. The first track angled toward the lead destroyer. The second bent toward the cruiser holding the center of the formation. The third was lower, flatter, and aimed toward the support ship moving behind them. 3 missiles, 3 U.S. Navy ships. No time for confusion. The watch officer called it out in a voice that stayed level. Vampires inbound. Multiple tracks bearing northeast. Across the ship, the general alarm sounded. Passageways that had been quiet seconds earlier filled with movement. Sailors moved fast, but not wildly. Boots hit steel decks. Hatches shut. Watertight doors sealed. Damage control teams grabbed gear. Weapons crews moved to assigned stations. In the Combat Information Center, no one looked away from the screens. The captain stepped onto the bridge and took one look at the display. No raised voice, no dramatic order, just a short command. Set condition 1. The destroyer changed posture in seconds. Forward sensors tightened their scan. Electronic warfare systems came alive. Fire control teams opened defensive tracks. On the weather deck, the 5-inch gun mount shifted a few degrees, silent and deliberate, while the vertical launch system remained closed beneath its steel covers. The ship was not firing yet, but it was awake. Outside, the Strait of Hormuz was still dark, caught in the blue-gray hour before sunrise. Oil tankers moved miles away on commercial lanes. The water looked calm from the surface. Nothing about the scene looked like a battlefield, but inside the American formation, every system knew better. The cruiser in the center of the group confirmed the same picture. 3 inbound missile tracks, low altitude, high speed, probable anti-ship profile. The support ship behind them, slower and less maneuverable, began turning slightly to open its defensive angle. The formation spread just enough to avoid presenting one clean target. Not panic, procedure. At 5:18, the first bridge-to-bridge transmission went out on the international distress and hailing frequency. Unidentified missile launch activity detected from your coastline. U.S. Navy vessels are operating in international waters. Cease hostile action immediately. No response. The message was repeated. Still nothing. The missiles kept coming. In the Combat Information Center, the Aegis system continued building the intercept solution. The lead destroyer spy radar locked onto the highest confidence track. The cruiser took the second. The third remained the problem. It was flying lower than the others, dropping close to the sea surface, using the clutter of waves to hide itself. The operator tracking it narrowed his eyes. Third track is sea-skimming, intermittent return. That changed the room. A sea-skimming missile is not just fast. It is designed to appear late, vanish often, and give a ship only seconds to react. It rides low over the water where radar has to fight reflections, spray, and the curve of the earth. The captain looked toward the tactical action officer. Time to first intercept. 4 minutes 30 seconds. 4 minutes. That was all the formation had before the first missile reached its defensive engagement zone. At 5:19, electronic warfare officers began flooding the air with confusion. Jamming signals pushed outward. Decoy systems warmed. Chaff launchers stood ready. Every ship in the group started sharing data in real time, building one connected picture of the attack. One ship saw a target. All 3 saw it. That was the difference between 3 isolated vessels and a U.S. Navy formation. The first Iranian missile rose slightly, then corrected down again. It was adjusting. The second began a shallow turn, trying to widen the angle against the cruiser. The third stayed low and steady, still aimed at the most vulnerable ship in the line. The cruiser reported weapons free for defensive fire. The destroyer matched it. At 5:20, the captain gave the order that moved the entire engagement from warning to survival. Engage inbound threats. Below deck, inside the vertical launch system, machinery responded before the human eye could catch it. A hatch snapped open. Gas vented upward. Then the first American interceptor came out of the ship in a column of white flame. An SM-2 missile punched into the dawn sky, turning hard toward the incoming threat. A second interceptor followed from the cruiser. then a third across the strait. The quiet broke open. On radar, the 3 inbound Iranian missiles continued closing. The American interceptors climbed to meet them, guided by shipboard sensors, math, and seconds of human judgment compressed into one decision. No one on the bridge spoke unless they had to. No one asked what would happen if the intercept failed. Everyone already knew. If one missile got through, steel would meet fire at hundreds of miles an hour. A ship could lose radar, lose propulsion, lose the ability to defend the others. And in the Strait of Hormuz, one disabled warship could turn a narrow waterway into a crisis zone within minutes. At 5:21, the first intercept countdown appeared on the tactical screen. 10 seconds 9. The lead destroyer held course. The cruiser maintained lock. The support ship kept turning, slow but steady, pushing its stern away from the incoming track. Then the first explosion flashed beyond the horizon, too far to see clearly from the deck, but bright enough to register as a sudden bloom on infrared sensors. The first Iranian missile was gone. No cheering, no relief because the second was still coming and the third had just disappeared from radar. At 5:22, the Aegis wall came alive. The first Iranian missile had been destroyed beyond visual range, but no one inside the formation treated it like a victory. One missile down meant nothing, while 2 more were still moving through the strait. Inside the cruiser's Combat Information Center, the second track was now the priority. It was not flying straight anymore. It had shifted its angle, bending slightly south, forcing the cruiser to recalculate the intercept path in real time. That was the problem with modern anti-ship missiles. They did not always behave like bullets. Some adjusted, some dipped, some used sea clutter. Some tried to force a defender to waste interceptors early and expose the ship later. The tactical action officer watched the screen. Track 2 is maneuvering. The captain did not move. Maintain solution. The cruiser's radar tightened its hold. The Aegis system updated the track, assigning probabilities faster than any human could speak them. Range, closure, rate, altitude, intercept, window, kill assessment. A second SM-2 was already in the air, climbing hard before rolling over toward the incoming threat. The missile's exhaust trail cut through the dawn like a white scar. Behind it, the strait was waking up. Commercial vessels were beginning to alter course. Tankers that had been moving steadily through Hormuz slowed just enough to create more space. None of them needed to be told what was happening. When warships begin launching interceptors at sunrise, the message is clear. Stay away. The second Iranian missile dropped lower. For 2 seconds, the cruiser's radar return weakened. Then it returned closer. Track 2 reacquired. The interceptor adjusted. Inside the cruiser, sailors watched the 2 symbols converge. No one looked at the clock anymore. The clock had become irrelevant. Everything was measured in distance now. 7 miles, 5 m, 3. The SM-2 closed from above. The Iranian missile stayed low, trying to force the intercept into a narrow, dirty slice of air above the waterline. Then the screen flashed. A white bloom opened on infrared. The second missile broke apart. Fragments scattered across the sea surface, still burning as they hit the water. The cruiser reported the kill in the same flat tone used to report weather. Track 2 neutralized. 2 missiles down, 1 left, and the third was the one nobody liked. It was still intermittent, still low, still aimed toward the support ship at the rear of the formation. The destroyer's spy radar caught it for half a second. The cruiser caught it next. Then the support ship's own sensors picked up the return. Weak but real, cutting across the surface at lethal speed. The track was not gone. It had been hiding. At 5:24, the support ship changed its defensive posture. Chaff launchers armed, decoy systems warmed, close-in weapons shifted from standby to automatic engagement authority, waiting for a clean lock. Damage control teams moved deeper inside the hull, ready for impact, but trained not to think about it. On the bridge, the officer of the deck watched the bow swing slowly through the turn too slowly. Large ships do not dodge missiles. They create angles. They buy seconds. They make the weapon work harder. The third missile was now inside 10 miles. The destroyer fired first. An ESSM leapt from its launcher, smaller than the SM-2, faster to react, built for the knife fight. It turned sharply across the formation, trying to cut the missile off before it reached the support ship's final defensive ring. For a moment, the solution looked good. Then the Iranian missile dropped again. The ESSM passed close, too close to call a miss at first. The blast shook the missile's path, but did not destroy it. Inside the CIC, the kill assessment appeared. Track 3 degraded, not neutralized. That was the sentence nobody wanted. The Iranian missile was damaged, but still coming. Now it was lower, unstable, and harder to predict. A clean missile follows a track. A damaged missile can tumble, correct, dive, or break apart at the worst possible moment. It could still strike the ship. It could detonate above the deck. It could slam into the water close enough to send fragments through exposed equipment. The support ship's phalanx system rotated toward the threat. The white dome locked. The barrel cluster began to move. At 5:25, the final defensive layer was no longer theory. It was about to fire. The missile appeared again on radar. 3 miles. The cruiser launched another ESSM. The destroyer fed targeting data across the network. The support ship held its turn. Everything in the formation was now focused on one object flying just above the water. 2 miles. The second ESSM closed from the side, detonating near the missile's flight path. The explosion tore pieces from the incoming weapon, but the main body continued forward, trailing fragments and fire. Inside the support ship, the command came over internal circuits. Brace for close intercept. The phalanx opened fire. There is no elegant sound when a Closian weapon system engages. It does not sound like a cannon. It sounds like machinery ripping the air apart. Thousands of rounds poured into the space ahead of the ship, creating a wall the missile had to fly through. On infrared, the Iranian missile became a bright shaking shape. Then it vanished in a burst of white heat. A second later, debris struck the water off the starboard bow. The shock wave rolled across the ship. Sailors felt it through the deck. Spray climbed higher than the bridge windows. Small fragments sparked against the sea and disappeared. For 3 seconds, no one spoke. Then reports began coming in. No hull breach, no flooding, minor topside damage. Ship remains operational. The third missile had failed, but the strait was not calm. At 5:27, the destroyer's electronic warfare team detected a new signal from the Iranian coast. Not a missile in flight, a fire control radar. Active, searching, then locking. The tactical display updated again. The captain stared at the screen. Iran had fired once. And now somewhere along the coastline, another system was waking up. At 5:27, the threat changed shape. The missiles were gone. The water around the formation was still boiling from the last intercept. Debris drifted off the support ship's starboard bow. Small black fragments rising and falling with the chop. Damage control teams were already moving through the upper decks, checking antennas, exposed wiring, radar housings, and sealed hatches. The ships had survived, but the fight was not over. Inside the lead destroyer's combat information center, the electronic warfare officer was staring at a new signal. Not airborne, not moving, not commercial. A fire control radar had just activated along the Iranian coast. The signal was narrow, focused, and deliberate. It was not scanning the general area. It was searching for something specific. Then the beam tightened again. It was looking at the formation. The EW officer called it out. New emitter, coastal fire control radar bearing 031. Every head in the room understood what that meant. A missile battery does not need to fire to be dangerous. First it finds, then it tracks, then it passes targeting data. After that, the launch can come in seconds. The captain stood behind the tactical display, arms still, face unreadable. Correlate with launch origin. The system began pulling the battle backward. Radar tracks from the first salvo. Infrared signatures from the intercepts. Electronic emissions from the coast. Satellite cueing. P8 maritime patrol data. Every sensor that had watched the attack was now being used to find the hand that fired it. On the screen, a box appeared near the Iranian shoreline. Then another, then a third. Possible launch sector, probable mobile battery, confirmed radar emitter. The Navy did not have one picture. It had layers of them. Each one sharpened the last. At 5:29, the support ship reported final damage status. No hull breach, no flooding, minor fragmentation damage to exposed equipment. One sailor treated for impact shock after being thrown against a bulkhead. The ship could still maneuver. It could still communicate. It could still remain in formation. That mattered. A damaged ship slows the group. A disabled ship anchors it. And in Hormuz, standing still is its own danger. The cruiser shifted slightly east, placing itself between the coast and the support ship. The destroyer adjusted west, opening its weapons arc. From above, the formation no longer looked like routine transit. It looked like a shield being raised. At 5:31, the coastal radar pulsed again, shorter this time, sharper. The tactical action officer looked up. They're refining targeting data. No one needed to ask who they meant. The captain gave the next order. Prepare counterbatter options. Defensive response only. That phrase mattered. Defensive response, not escalation for its own sake, not punishment, not a broad strike. The Navy's job in that moment was simple. Prevent a second launch. The destroyer's vertical launch cell were checked. The cruiser began building target quality data. The support ship continued clearing debris and restoring full sensor coverage. Every command was spoken in a low tone, logged, repeated, confirmed. A U.S. Navy warship does not move from defense to strike because someone is angry. It moves because the threat chain is still active. At 5:33, the P-8 Poseidon orbiting outside the immediate danger zone fed in a new update. Its sensors had detected heat signatures consistent with mobile launch vehicles near a rocky coastal road. One vehicle was stationary, one was moving. A third heat bloom sat beside what appeared to be a camouflaged radar truck. Then the drone feed arrived, grainy at first, then clearer. 3 vehicles positioned near a line of containers and low concrete structures. The containers looked civilian from a distance, but their spacing was wrong, too deliberate, too clean. A radar mast rose between 2 of them, then lowered halfway as if the crew knew they had been seen. The Combat Information Center went silent for half a second. That was the confirmation. The missile site was not theoretical anymore. It was real. At 5:35, the Iranian radar locked again. This time, the support ship's warning receivers detected it directly. A hard tone sounded on the bridge. For a moment, the earlier missile strike came back into everyone's mind. The low track, the disappearing return, the final phalanx burst, the debris landing close enough to shake the hull. But no one froze. The captain turned to the tactical action officer. If that battery launches again, engage immediately. The answer came back. Aye, Captain. Then the radar signal vanished. Not destroyed, just silent. That was worse. A radar that stays on can be tracked. A radar that blinks on and off is playing a different game. It shows itself just long enough to update the missile battery, then disappears before a weapon can follow the beam home. The Iranian crew was not panicking. They were still working. At 5:37, the moving vehicle on the drone feed stopped beside the camouflaged launcher. Heat signatures increased around its rear section. A support truck reversed toward it. Men moved quickly between the vehicles. The assessment appeared on the destroyer's screen. Possible reload activity. The captain read it once, then he gave the order that changed the engagement again. Find me a clean shot. The cruiser fed coordinates into the network. The P-8 confirmed the emitter's last position. The drone held visual contact. The destroyer's weapons team began preparing a precision strike solution. Still, the formation waited. Because in a narrow waterway filled with civilian traffic, steel alone is not enough. The shot had to be clean. The path had to be clear. The target had to be confirmed. At 5:39, the radar mast rose again. A thin signal cut across the strait. The battery was waking up for another launch. And this time, the US Navy was no longer just defending. It was aiming back. At 5:41, the response package was approved. There was no speech from the bridge, no raised voice, no dramatic countdown, just a line of coordinates pushed through the combat network and confirmed across 3 ships, 1 aircraft, and an unmanned sensor orbiting high over the coast. The target was no longer a guess. The Iranian missile battery had revealed itself 3 times. First with the launch, then with the fire control radar, then with the reload activity. That was enough. Inside the destroyer's combat information center, the tactical action officer leaned over his console and checked the target file one final time. Mobile launcher, coastal radar truck, probable command vehicle, possible reload unit. No civilian vessels in the strike corridor. No aircraft crossing the route. No friendly units inside the impact zone. The captain listened to the report without interrupting. Then he gave the order. Execute limited defensive strike. Limited. That word mattered. The US Navy was not opening a war across the coastline. It was not firing blindly into the dark. It was cutting one active missile site out of the kill chain before it could launch again. Below deck, the destroyer's vertical launch system came alive. A forward cell unlocked, then another. The ship trembled as the first Tomahawk cruise missile fired upward, riding a column of flame before tipping toward the Iranian coast. Seconds later, a second missile foul. Then a third programmed for a separate aim, point inside the same target complex. The destroyer did not change speed. It did not turn toward the coast. It simply launched, logged the event, and held formation. That was the discipline of it. One part of the ship had just sent precision weapons toward an active threat. Another part was still tracking the sea lanes. Another was still monitoring for small boats. Another was checking for more missile signatures. A modern warship does not focus on one danger. It divides attention without losing control. At 5:42, the cruiser began its own part of the strike, not with missiles, with electronic warfare. Its systems pushed interference toward the coastal radar band, filling the air between the ships and the battery with noise. The goal was simple: blind the launcher long enough to keep it from feeding targeting data into another missile. The Iranian radar blinked on again, then distorted, then dropped. In the support ship's combat information center, the hard lock tone stopped. For the first time in nearly 20 minutes, the rear ship was no longer being painted. But nobody relaxed. The Tomahawks were still in flight. The drone feed showed movement near the launch site. Heat signatures scattered between the containers. One vehicle began rolling out from behind a low concrete wall, trying to leave the area. Another remained parked beside the radar mast. The mobile launcher had shifted position by a few meters, but not enough. It was still inside the box. At 5:44, the first Tomahawk crossed the coastline. It came in low, too low for most radar to see early, too steady to waste motion. Its route had been built to avoid unnecessary exposure, following terrain and sea level approach angles until the final seconds. The Iranian radar truck tried to come alive again. A weak signal appeared. Then the cruiser buried it under jamming. The first impact hit the radar vehicle. On the drone feed, there was a white flash, then a hard bloom of heat. The mast disappeared. The truck vanished behind fire and dust. The signal on the destroyer's electronic display died instantly. No fade, no drift, gone. Emitter offline. The electronic warfare officer reported the second Tomahawk arrived seconds later. Its target was the launcher. The missile struck the camouflaged vehicle from above and behind, exactly where the launch rails and fuel systems were concentrated. The explosion was larger than expected. A secondary blast followed almost immediately, throwing bright fragments outward and lighting up the surrounding containers. That told the room what they needed to know. There had been more missiles there, or fuel, or both. Secondary explosions confirmed. The captain did not answer. He kept watching the screen. A third target remained, the command vehicle. It had started moving just before the first strike, turning toward the road that led inland. The drone kept it centered in frame. The vehicle accelerated, then slowed as if unsure whether to run or hide under the nearby structures. The third Tomahawk corrected. In the final seconds, its seeker locked onto the moving heat source. The command vehicle disappeared in a flash that flattened the dust around it and left only a burning outline on the road. At 5:46, the launch site was silent. No radar, no movement around the launcher. No new missile tracks. The drone circled once, then widened its view. The containers were burning. The launcher was destroyed. The radar truck was gone. The command vehicle was disabled beyond use. The reload truck had stopped moving near the edge of the site, damaged, but not producing any launch signature. Inside the destroyer, the report came in clean. Coastal battery neutralized. Still, the formation did not stand down. In Hormuz, one threat disappearing does not mean the water is safe. It means the next threat has not shown itself yet. The cruiser maintained jamming posture for another full minute. The destroyer kept its defensive missiles hot. The support ship restored full communications and continued damage checks. Lookouts scanned for fast boats. Radar teams searched for aircraft. Sonar crews listened beneath the hull. The attack had lasted minutes. The aftermath would last hours. At 5:49, the first commercial tanker called over the radio asking if the lane was clear. The American response was brief. Maintain distance. Continue on assigned heading. The U.S. formation kept moving west through the strait. Behind them, smoke rose from the coast. Ahead of them, the water remained open. And on every screen inside the Combat Information Center, one fact mattered more than all the rest. Iran had fired. The missiles had failed. The launcher was gone. But the Strait of Hormuz was still watching. By 6:12, the sun was rising over Hormuz, and all three U.S. Navy ships were still moving. The lead destroyer held course. The cruiser stayed in the center of the formation. The support ship, still carrying scars from the close intercept, maintained speed behind them. Nothing about the formation looked broken. That was the point. A missile attack had just crossed one of the most sensitive waterways on Earth, and the American ships had not scattered, stopped, or turned back. They absorbed the shock, killed the threat, struck the source, and kept moving. Inside the support ship, damage control teams were still working. The starboard side had taken fragments from the final missile's destruction. A sensor housing was cracked. One exposed antenna had been sliced by debris. Burn marks stray across part of the upper deck where fragments had skipped across steel and disappeared into the water. But the hull was intact. No flooding, no propulsion loss, no fire spreading below deck. The ship was hurt, but not crippled. That difference mattered. On the bridge of the lead destroyer, the captain watched the tactical display as the Iranian coastline slowly shifted astern. The destroyed missile site was no longer producing radar emissions. No second salvo had appeared. No fast boats had moved from nearby harbors. No aircraft were closing from the north. For the first time since 517, the formation had space to breathe. But nobody called it over. At sea, silence is not safety. It is just silence. Inside the Combat Information Center, the replay had already begun. Every second of the attack was being reviewed. The first missile launch, the radar acquisition, the interceptor flight paths, the second missile's maneuver, the third missile's low approach, the moment it vanished into sea clutter, the phalanx engagement, the coastal radar activation, the Tomahawk strike. Every detail became data. Every data Point became doctrine. That is how the Navy survives the next attack. Not by pretending this one was clean. It was not clean. The third missile came too close. The support ship took fragments. The first SM did not fully kill the target. The Iranian battery nearly had time to prepare another launch. Those facts would be studied, written down, and used to sharpen the system. That is the difference between luck and professionalism. Luck says the ship survived. Professionalism asks why. At 6:20, the cruiser reported full defensive readiness restored. The support ship confirmed stable systems. The destroyer maintained weapons posture, but no longer had an active fire control radar pointed at the coast. The limited strike had achieved its purpose. The battery that fired was gone. The formation remained intact. The waterways stayed open. That was the message. Not shouted, not broadcast, delivered. Iran had tried to use speed, surprise, and geography. Hormuz is narrow. It favors the side that fires first. Missiles launched from shore do not have to travel far. Ships inside the strait have less room to maneuver and less time to react. That was the calculation. But the US Navy brought something else into the fight. A network. One radar did not defend one ship. 3 ships shared one battle space. 1 aircraft fed the picture. 1 drone confirmed the target. 1 cruiser jammed the radar. 1 destroyer fired the strike. 1 support ship survived because the formation fought as a single machine. That is what Iran ran into. Not 3 isolated ships. A system. At 6:34, the first civilian tanker resumed normal speed behind the American formation. Then another. Then a container ship adjusted back toward the traffic lane. Commercial crews had watched the sky light up. They had seen interceptors rise from American warships. They had seen smoke on the coast. And now they saw the same 3 US ships still moving through the strait. That image carried its own weight. A warship does not need to speak when it stays on course after being fired upon. In Washington, the first reports would come later. Careful language, confirmed defensive actions, no broad escalation, no unnecessary claims. At Fleet Command, the timeline would be reconstructed down to the second. At intelligence centers, analysts would study the Iranian radar signatures, launch sequence, and reload pattern. But for the sailors who lived through it, the lesson was simpler. The alarm sounded, the missiles came in, the system held, and when the source revealed itself, the Navy removed it. By 6:47, the formation cleared the most exposed section of the transit. The ships did not speed away. They did not celebrate. They did not fire flares or send a message for cameras. They returned to controlled movement, scanning every horizon like the next threat might already be forming. Because that is how deterrence works. Not with noise, with readiness. The side that panics loses control. The side that overreacts creates the next crisis. The side that waits too long may not survive. Somewhere between those 3 failures is the narrow lane every commander has to find. That morning in Hormuz, the US Navy found it. 3 missiles were fired at 3 American ships. None reached their targets. The battery that launched them was neutralized and the formation kept moving. So here is the question. If you were standing inside that combat information center watching Iranian missiles closing on 3 US Navy ships, would you have ordered the same limited strike or hit every launcher on the coast before another salvo could rise? Drop your take in the comments because out here restraint is not weakness. It is control. And control is what keeps a narrow waterway from becoming a war zone. Iran fired the missiles. The US Navy wrote the ending.